The wind cut across the Arizona territory like a knife sharp, dry, and merciless, carrying dust and the bitter promise of an early winter. Eliza Harrow pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stood outside her tiny log cabin, staring at the nearly empty woodpile. Only 3 pieces remained, hardly enough to last a single night. Her fingers trembled, not from cold but from the weight of fear settling on her chest. Her little brother Tommy, barely 6 years old, coughed from inside the cabin. The sound was thin and ragged, the kind that always made Eliza feel as though she were failing him. After their parents died on the wagon trail and her husband passed from fever 2 years later, Tommy was all she had. She had fought to protect him every day since, but the frontier was cruel, and cruelty didn't care about her promises. Snow hadn't yet fallen, but the mornings already held frost. Without firewood, Tommy's cough would worsen. Without warmth, the nights could kill. Eliza glanced toward the settlement 2 miles away. The townsfolk had nothing for her, not kindness, not help, not even advice. Her husband's old debts had left her branded as unreliable, and the judge, a man with a face carved like a sour apple, had ordered her to pay fines she couldn't afford for missed church duties. She'd tried to bargain. She'd begged him to give her time. He'd refused with an indifferent shrug. Winter, however, wasn't going to wait. Eliza swallowed hard, looking toward the dense pine forest beyond her cabin. It stretched endlessly toward the hills like a dark sea. That land belonged to Tazanez, the wealthy and enigmatic Apache landholder whose name settlers spoke in whispers. The common stories weren't kind. Some said he rode with warriors at night. Others claimed he punished trespassers with fierce intensity. But Eliza had never seen him angry or otherwise. She had never seen him at all. The only thing she knew was that the forest belonged to him, and that meant taking wood from it was considered stealing. But what choice did she have? Tommy coughed again, this time harder, and that single sound was enough to make Eliza decide. Pride wouldn't warm a cabin. Fear wouldn't save a child. She grabbed her worn wool gloves, tied her scarf beneath her chin, and set off toward the tree line. Her boots crunched over frozen grass as she approached the forest's edge. Tall ponderosa pines rose around her, their trunks thick and straight like pillars holding up the sky. The moment she stepped inside, the air changed, still, colder, but somehow alive. She remembered something her father used to say, "A forest breathes, girl. If you listen, you'll hear its heartbeat." Eliza wasn't listening to trees today. She was listening for footsteps, for danger, for him. She kept her head down, searching for fallen branches, for anything that wouldn't harm the forest itself. She found a broken limb beneath a cluster of pines and whispered a quiet, shaky, "Thank you," as she lifted it. In truth, she didn't even know who she was thanking. Maybe the land. Maybe luck. Minutes passed. Her arms filled with wood. Her heartbeat slowed. For a moment, she dared to believe she might make it out unseen. Then a shadow fell across the ground. Eliza froze. Her breath caught. Slowly she lifted her eyes. He stood there, Tazanez tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long, dark coat trimmed in beadwork. His hair fell past his shoulders, black as raven feathers, and his expression was unreadable. Not cruel, not angry, but powerful. His dark eyes moved from her bundle of firewood to her trembling hands. He didn't speak at first. He simply studied her, the worn boots, the frayed shawl, the exhaustion she couldn't hide. She felt small beneath his gaze, like a child caught stealing bread. Her voice cracked as she tried to explain. I just needed a little. I wasn't going to take much." Taza raised a hand gently. Stopping her words, when he finally spoke, his voice was low, calm, and strong enough to anchor the wind itself. "You don't need to steal to stay alive." The forest seemed to hush around his words. Even Eliza's fear stilled, not because he looked harmless, but because he looked honest. She gripped the wood tighter. Unsure whether to run or drop everything, Taza stepped closer, slow and deliberate, studying her as though trying to understand the story she wasn't telling. In that moment, Eliza realized something she hadn't expected. He wasn't angry, he was concerned, and that was somehow far more terrifying. For a long moment, Eliza couldn't form a single word. The woods were silent except for Tommy's cough echoing faintly in her memory and the distant rustle of pine needles shifting in the wind. Taza stood as steady as the trees around them, as though he belonged to the land in a way she never would. Eliza finally swallowed and managed a whisper. "Please, I wasn't trying to cause trouble." Taza didn't step closer, but he didn't step back either. His calm unsettled her more than anger would have. She had prepared excuses, apologies, even the possibility of running, but not this quiet, measured stillness. His gaze lowered to the bundle of wood in her arms. "That is deadfall," he said. "Not living branches." "Yes," she breathed, surprised he noticed. "I only pick up what's already fallen." He gave a slow nod of approval. "Good." Another long pause. Eliza felt the cold creeping into her toes, but her face burned with embarrassment. Then Taza asked, in a tone almost too gentle for such a large man, "Why are you out here alone?" Eliza stiffened. No one asked her that. In town, they demanded answers, never offered concern. She tried to shrug as though it didn't matter. "Winter's early. Ran out of wood." "There are many men in the settlement," he replied. "Yet you walked 2 miles into the forest by yourself?" Eliza gave a bitter laugh she didn't mean to let slip. "Men in town don't help widows unless they can get something out of it." Taza's expression didn't change, but something in the air felt sharper, like the wind had shifted through him. "Your husband passed." "Recently?" 2 years. "And your family?" "Just my little brother. He's sick." She looked down. "Cold makes him worse." Taza studied her for a long, quiet moment, as though weighing hundreds of unspoken things. Not suspicion. Not judgment. Something heavier, understanding. Without warning, he turned and motioned for her to follow. "Come, I will show you something." Eliza hesitated. Following a stranger, an Apache warrior with a reputation whispered in saloons, should have terrified her. But he'd already seen her at her worst. What else did she have to lose? She stepped after him. They walked deeper into the trees, the air growing cooler and thicker with the scent of pine resin. Sunlight filtered through high branches and pale ribbons, gilding the forest floor. Every few steps, Taza would stop, crouch, and point to something she wouldn't have noticed. He touched the bark of a tall ponderosa. "Smell this." Eliza leaned close and inhaled. The tree smelled faintly sweet, like warm vanilla. "Your people cut these for cabins," he said, his hand resting on the trunk. "But they take more than the land can give back." "My people." He lowered his hand. "We take only what we need." Eliza felt a sting of shame. She had never considered where wood came from, only that she needed it. He pointed at a patch of shrubs. "Rabbit brush. Good for kindling." He pointed to a dried plant covered in soft fluff. "Milkweed. Keep children warm." He lifted a fallen limb with one hand. "And this deadfall is a gift. Use it, and the forest stays strong." Eliza realized she was learning more in these few minutes than she had in her entire life. "You know everything about this place," she murmured. Taza's lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile. "I listen. The land speaks if you respect it." They reached a clearing where sunlight warmed a ring of pale stones. He stopped there and gestured around them. "This forest gives freely," he said. "Always has." Eliza hugged her wood bundle tighter. "But it's your land." Taza turned to her fully, eyes steady on hers. "The land belongs to itself," he corrected softly. "I am only its guardian." The wind rustled between them, lifting strands of her hair. Then he said the words that would change everything. "Take what you need." Her breath hitched. "You don't even know me." "I know hardship," he replied. "And I know when someone is trying to survive, not steal." Eliza blinked hard, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. "No one in town would ever—" "I am not from your town," Taza said simply. The simplicity of it stole her breath. For the first time in months, Eliza felt something loosen inside her chest, a knot she had carried too long. And as she looked at the man standing before her, a stranger who showed her more compassion in 10 minutes than the town had shown in 2 years, she felt something else Kalan hoped out, small, fragile, flickering like the first spark in a winter hearth, but alive. The days that followed were unlike any Eliza had known. Each morning she found herself waking to the soft scent of pine and earth rather than the bitter smoke of her meager hearth. The snow had begun to fall in small, deliberate flakes, dusting the forest floor like powdered sugar, and she moved among the trees with a new sense of purpose. She was no longer simply a desperate woman searching for firewood, she was a student of the land. Guided by Taza, whose presence was both comforting and imposing, Taza visited her cabin at dawn, as predictable as the rising sun. He carried bundles of fallen wood, herbs, and dried roots he had gathered, and sometimes small gifts for her brother, Tommy, who seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. There was no pity in his eyes, only observation, patience, and a quiet authority. He showed Eliza how to identify plants with medicinal properties, pointing out pine needles that could be brewed to relieve coughs and roots that could strengthen the body against winter's chill. He taught her the importance of respecting the forest, of taking only what was necessary, and never disturbing living trees or harming wildlife unnecessarily. Eliza listened attentively, absorbing each lesson like dry soil drinking water. She learned to recognize edible berries under snow, how to start a fire with damp kindling, and how to layer logs for maximum warmth. Taza moved through the forest with a grace that made the land seem alive, his eyes catching every detail, his hands brushing over the trees with familiarity. In his presence, Eliza felt the forest itself guiding her, and for the first time, she understood the interconnectedness of the land. The plants, and the people who depended on it. The town, however, remained a looming threat. Word spread quickly among the settlers that a wealthy Apache had been seen assisting a struggling widow. Whispers turned into rumors, some saying she had bewitched him, others claiming she was betraying her own people. A few men, jealous, wary, or simply cruel, threatened her in the streets, but Taza never left her side when she ventured into town. His mere presence commanded respect, and though his eyes never wavered from hers, the townsfolk quickly realized that any attempt to intimidate her would fail, yet the forest itself became her sanctuary. With Taza's guidance, she built a small shed to store firewood and supplies, reinforcing her cabin walls and preparing for harsher storms. Every morning she would leave Tommy bundled in blankets and set out with Taza, learning not just survival skills but a philosophy of living in harmony with the land. She began to feel a sense of empowerment that had been foreign in her years of struggle, a realization that survival was not merely endurance, but knowledge and respect. There were moments, quiet and tender, when she would catch Taza watching her as she worked. He did not speak of it, but his steady gaze, full of admiration and curiosity, unsettled her more than the winter wind. She felt exposed, not physically, but in a way that left her heart both vulnerable and aware. And in turn, Taza began to notice the small resilience in her movements, the care with which she stacked wood, the patience she showed Tommy, and the quiet courage she demonstrated in the face of fear. One afternoon, after a particularly heavy snowfall, Eliza and Taza paused at a clearing where the sun barely pierced the canopy. The snow glistened like crystals on the pine needles, and the forest seemed to hold its breath in serenity. Taza handed her a bundle of branches, and she realized she was no longer trembling. She was confident, stronger, part of something larger than herself. "You are learning," Taza said softly, almost as an observation to the wind. "Not just to survive, but to live." Eliza lowered her eyes, cheeks warming under the intensity of his gaze. "I never knew this forest could be so generous," she admitted. "I always thought it was something to fear." "Only those who take without respect are punished," Taza replied. "Those who listen are rewarded." It was a lesson she would carry with her forever, and so the forest became her refuge. It sheltered her from hunger, provided warmth for her brother, and opened a new world she had never imagined. More than that, it offered her a sense of belonging and a growing trust in the man who had saved her, not through wealth or power, but through patience, knowledge, and quiet strength. In a land ruled by harsh winters and harsher people, Eliza discovered that survival required more than grit. It required guidance, understanding, and the courage to accept help when it came from unexpected hands. By the time spring crept into the forest, melting snow into glistening streams, Eliza was no longer the same woman who had crept into the woods with trembling hands and desperation in her heart. She had begun to see a future, a life in which she could protect herself and her brother, honor the land, and perhaps in time, honor the man who had quietly offered her more than wood, more than warmth, and more than safety. He had given her the forest, and, without realizing it, he had begun to give her hope. Spring's first thaw brought life back to the forest, but the town's bitterness toward Eliza lingered like a shadow. She had begun to venture into town more often now, carrying herbs, dried roots, and news for neighbors. But no matter how careful she was, whispers followed her like ghosts. "The widow who consorts with the Apache," they said. "Who needs saving from her own kind?" Some men muttered threats when she passed, their words sharp as knives. Eliza tried to ignore them, yet the fear never fully left her. Then one evening, a messenger arrived at her cabin, his boots crunching over the thawing earth. He handed her a note, scrawled in the judge's unmistakable hand. "Pay your fines immediately. No exceptions. The law does not forgive the weak." Eliza's stomach turned. The note was not merely a warning, it was an overt threat. If she failed to pay, they would seize whatever little she had left. She crumpled the paper in her hand, staring at the fading light beyond her window. Tommy, curled under his blanket, stirred but didn't wake. She felt a fierce mix of fear and helplessness. Winter had been cruel, but spring could be crueler when men in authority sought to exploit the desperate. The next morning, before she could devise a plan, a group of 3 burly men appeared at her door. They barged in without ceremony, overturning furniture and scattering her meager belongings. One of them reached for Tommy's blankets, sneering. "Your brother will freeze if you don't pay, widow." "Maybe then you'll learn." Eliza's hands trembled as she stepped in front of him. "Stop, you won't take him," she shouted, but her voice faltered under the weight of their numbers. Fear tightened around her like a vice. She realized she was powerless against them alone. Then came the sound she had learned to rely on, the soft but deliberate crunch of boots through snow and dirt. Taza appeared at the edge of her cabin, silent as the forest itself. He did not shout. He did not demand. He simply stepped forward, each movement measured, his dark eyes fixing the men with a calm authority that unsettled even the bravest of them. "You are trespassing," he said. His voice carried effortlessly, low and steady, but heavy with the weight of truth. "You threaten a woman and child. Leave, now." The men laughed, trying to mask their unease. "And who's going to stop us, Apache?" "You? One of them spat on the floor. But the moment their eyes met Taza's, the laughter faltered. There was no menace in him, only certainty. His presence alone seemed to bend the air, silence the room, and demand attention. Taza did not need to raise a hand. He did not need to strike. He spoke truth instead, and in doing so, dismantled their courage. "The law you serve is corrupt," he said. "It takes from the poor and shelters the greedy. You know this to be true. Go back to the town, or be judged not by men, but by justice." For the first time in her life, Eliza saw fear in the eyes of men who thought themselves fearless. They muttered curses, backed toward the door, and fled, leaving the cabin and its inhabitants untouched. Taza turned to her gently, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "You are safe," he said. His gaze softened as it met hers. "You owe them nothing. You owe yourself a better life." Eliza's knees buckled slightly, relief and awe flooding her. For months she had endured hardship alone, trusting no one, fearing the cruelty of those who should have helped her. And now, standing there with the man who had given her wood, warmth, and knowledge, she realized the truth: help could exist, and justice could be delivered without violence, sometimes simply through presence, courage, and integrity. She glanced at Tommy, asleep and peaceful under the blankets. She realized that the woods, the forest, and Taza's guidance had done more than warm her home. They had restored a sense of hope that she thought lost forever. And in that moment, she understood something profound. Survival was more than enduring the harsh elements or the cruelty of men. It was about trust, about accepting assistance when it was offered with honesty, and about standing in the light of someone who saw her worth, even when the rest of the world did not. Taza squeezed her shoulder lightly. "Tomorrow we will teach you more about the forest," he said. "And the next day, the town may learn to respect it and you." Eliza allowed herself a small smile, feeling something she hadn't in months: relief, gratitude, and perhaps quietly the first stirrings of trust. Even affection. The forest was more than a refuge now. It was a sanctuary where danger could be faced, lessons could be learned, and a life could be rebuilt one day, one branch, one act of courage at a time. Spring had fully arrived, and with it, the forest around Eliza's cabin bloomed into a riot of green. Pine needles glistened with morning dew, streams gurgled with melted snow, and birds filled the air with song. For the first time in years, Eliza felt a sense of belonging not just to the land, but to something larger than herself. And Taza, the man who had taught her to respect and survive in this wilderness, had become more than a guide. He was a steady presence she could rely on. One morning, Taza approached with a proposal. "The spring gathering begins tomorrow," he said. "You and your brother should come." Eliza hesitated. She had never attended such an event. The Apache community was close-knit, proud, and protective of its traditions. She wondered how she, a lone widow, could fit in. Her family in town often whispered rumors about her relations with Taza, so stepping into his world felt like entering a foreign land. But Taza's eyes held no mockery, only reassurance. "They will see who you truly are. They will see your courage. And your brother," he gestured toward Tommy, who peeked curiously from behind a curtain, "will be welcomed." The next day, they set off into the heart of the forest, following trails Taza had walked countless times. Eliza noticed the careful attention he paid to every detail: the bends in the path, the sound of distant water, the warning calls of wildlife. He moved with an ease she envied, each step deliberate, grounded, and confident. Upon arriving, Eliza was greeted with curiosity rather than suspicion. Women smiled and offered kind words. Children waved, their laughter echoing through the trees. She was guided to a circle where elders shared stories of the land, lessons passed down through generations about survival, stewardship, and respect. Taza had shown her how to listen. Now she could absorb wisdom that extended beyond her own struggle. As the day progressed, Eliza saw how Taza's people lived in harmony with the land he protected. They taught young settlers about responsible wood gathering, water conservation, and herbal remedies. Eliza participated eagerly, feeling a deep sense of pride as she explained what Taza had taught her. She realized that through learning and sharing, she was building bridges between communities once divided by fear and misunderstanding. Tommy, in particular, thrived in this environment. A small elder handed him a carved wooden bird as a blessing, a symbol of health and protection. The boy's eyes sparkled, and Eliza felt tears prick her own. In these moments, the forest and its people had become a place of safety, education, and hope. Throughout the day, Taza remained near her side, often speaking softly, guiding her through traditions and ceremonies. Eliza noticed subtle glances, gentle gestures, and moments when he seemed to admire her quietly, how she interacted with Tommy, how she absorbed lessons from elders, how she moved through the forest with growing confidence. She began to feel something that surprised her, not fear, but warmth, curiosity, and slowly, the stirrings of affection died as they walked back to her cabin in the soft evening light. Taza's presence was a comforting weight at her side. He spoke quietly, almost confiding. "Seeing you in my forest, watching you learn, caring for your brother, it felt like I'd found someone I didn't know I was searching for." Eliza's heart quickened. She glanced at him, searching for jest or exaggeration, but found only sincerity. For years she had believed trust was dangerous, that dependence was weakness, that love could only bring loss. Yet here was a man who had not only saved her physically but nurtured her soul, who had taught her the forest and its lessons while respecting her dignity. She began, hesitating. "I've never felt safe like this, or seen the world this way." Taza smiled softly, his eyes reflecting the amber light of the setting sun through the trees. "You are stronger than you know, Eliza, stronger than I imagined. And you are not alone anymore." For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it not only the survival she had fought for, but the possibility of companionship, protection, and a future filled with hope. The forest, once a place she entered out of desperation, had become a sanctuary. And Taza, the man she had first feared, had become the heart of that sanctuary. That night, as they returned to the cabin, she realized something profound. Life was no longer merely about enduring hardship. It was about connection, trust, and the courage to open her heart, even when fear lingered. The forest had taught her survival, but Taza had taught her the first lesson of living fully. She could belong, and she could love. Summer arrived in the Arizona territory with the gentle warmth of sunbeams filtering through tall pines, and the forest around Eliza's cabin had fully transformed into a vibrant sanctuary. Wildflowers colored the forest floor, streams bubbled with crystal-clear water, and the air was alive with birdsong. The once frightening woods, where she had ventured out of desperation, had become a place of life, learning, and love. And at the center of this transformation was Taza Nez, whose presence had reshaped not just her survival, but her heart. With Taza's guidance, Eliza had rebuilt her cabin stronger and warmer. Together they had reinforced the walls, insulated the roof, and planted fruit trees around the perimeter. These weren't just practical improvements. They were symbols of a life reclaimed. Tommy's laughter now filled the cabin halls, a sound that warmed both their hearts. But Taza's lessons extended beyond wood and herbs. He continued to teach Eliza the wisdom of the Apache way, how to harvest from the land respectfully, how to move silently and observe nature's rhythms, and how generosity and protection were intertwined with leadership. Through these lessons, Eliza began sharing her knowledge with the surrounding settlers, bridging two worlds that had often been divided by fear and misunderstanding. She taught young families how to gather firewood without harming trees, how to identify edible plants, and how to respect the fragile balance of the forest ecosystem. Over time, Taza and Eliza's relationship deepened, growing with the same quiet resilience that marked the forest itself. Their connection was built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the intimacy of survival. They learned each other's silences and words, fears and strengths, slowly weaving trust and affection together. What began as guidance and protection blossomed into companionship, and then into something more tender, more profound. One more morning, beneath the tall pines where snow had first driven Eliza to the forest, Taza led her to a small clearing. Sunlight dappled the ground, highlighting the vibrant green of new leaves and the golden glow of pine needles. He stopped, his dark eyes meeting hers with a sincerity that made her breath catch. "This forest was mine alone," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of truth, history, and care. "But my life doesn't have to be." Eliza felt her heart swell. She took his hand, the warmth of his skin grounding her. "Then share it with me," she whispered, a promise and a hope mingled in her voice. Taza smiled, a rare, gentle expression that softened the strong planes of his face. Around them, the forest seemed to sigh, as if affirming their union. He guided her to a circle of stones, the same place where he had first shown her the generosity of the forest, and there, with the scent of pine and wildflowers surrounding them, they made a vow not formal by town records, but sacred in its simplicity. The following weeks were filled with joy and new beginnings. Eliza and Taza worked side by side in the cabin, teaching, tending the land, and caring for Tommy. Their days were filled with small acts of love, sharing meals, helping neighbors, and ensuring the forest remained as generous and sustainable as it had been for generations. Through this partnership, Elisa learned that life was not only about survival, but about nurturing, protecting, and giving freely. Just as Taza had taught her. By the time autumn arrived, Eliza realized that she no longer feared the cold, the world, or the unknown. She had found safety, community, and love. The forest, once a place of desperation, had become a cradle of growth and connection. And Taza, the man who had first confronted her in the woods, had become her anchor, her partner, and the fatherly figure for her brother Dodd as they stood together beneath the towering pines. Tommy laughing at their feet, Eliza understood the full measure of her journey. From fear to trust, from desperation to hope, she had learned that generosity, courage, and respect could transform lives. The forest had given her wood to survive, but it was Taza who had given her a life worth living. And in that forest, surrounded by the land that had sheltered and nurtured them both, Eliza and Taza found not only each other, but the promise of a future built on love, respect, and harmony. They had survived the hardships of the West. But more importantly, they had thrived together, proving that courage and compassion could create a legacy stronger than any hardship, and love could flourish even in the harshest wilderness. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light through the pines, and Eliza, holding Taza's hand, whispered a quiet vow to the forest and to herself. "This is home. This is hope. And this is ours." Together they walked back to the cabin, hearts full, lives intertwined, and the forest alive around them. A sanctuary, a refuge, and a beginning of lasting happiness.